the United States is not perfect, and that an authoritarian regime and takeover is very possible here, and we shouldn't fool ourselves in thinking that it's not possible here. I think a lot of people in the United States are used to thinking that that type of stuff happens in other countries because of, neoliberalism and Western imperialism, but it is very possible here, and that we all need to be prepared for it.
Hello humans, it's Dan from Power Report. Thank you very much for joining us today. It is a pleasure and it is going to be worth it. We are currently talking as September is winding down and we begin into October, and we begin the final stretch of the worst election of our lifetime so far. Hope y'all are staying with me. Hope y'all are doing okay. We will make it through it, I promise. With the SCOTUS race just heating up, especially after the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it's become increasingly obvious, painfully so, that the Democrats do not in fact have a plan for what is about to happen. They still keep responding to the Republicans, who have shown that they will lie about anything they said, they will turn back their word, they'll turn back their message, so as to maintain and grab total power, complete and total power. They're not interested in playing nice with Democrats, yet Democrats seem interested in playing nice, at least on camera. It's almost as though Democrats didn't pay attention to the 4 years or 4 decades of Republican Party character development. Otherwise, they would have known that this is the coalescing of everything they argue for in the Republican mission. They want total power in the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch. A lot of people's reasoning for voting for Trump, even though they disliked him as a person, is because that he would promise them conservative Supreme Court justice seats, and that's exactly what they're getting. Ever since making my bad news video, which you can watch at youtube.com/Dan from the internet, of course, I've been trying to refocus my political analysis from something for passive news consumers to watch as the world is exploding, to something that empowers people who are watching what I make to give them the tools they need to actually make a difference in the world around them for their community and for themselves. Folks, these are the days, hours, and minutes you have before shit really starts going down. And the Democrats don't have a plan for you. But luckily, I spoke to someone who does.
My name is Marium Navid. I am a digital organizer, and I am one of the co-authors of the Hold the Line Guide, a guide to defending democracy that a group of organizers and researchers put together just recently to give everyday people like a very realistic roadmap that they can use to stop Trump from essentially stealing the election.
More of Power Report's upcoming guests will feature activists who are coming from the trenches around the country and around the world to really give us a sense of what is really needed for this moment and how budding, starting activists can really kind of ingratiate themselves in the space. Even though people power is grossly underrepresented in mainstream media, people power is still power, and that's something we're going to be talking about on Power Report here. So get your notes ready. You're definitely going to need them, and you're definitely going to want them. Marium's an incredible guest with a lot of information, and you're going to want to know about it. Just make sure that you follow at the Red Line Guide on Twitter and Instagram for more information, including a link to the PDF that we're talking about with all the information. And make sure you're subscribed to Power Report wherever you are listening or watching so you don't miss more stuff like this. All right, let's get into it. Marium, thank you very much for coming on and making it through. I know there was like a couple of scheduling back and forth we had to do to make this happen, but I'm so glad to do this because I know you from college, and I've seen some of the work you've done in activist spaces, and I've been amazed by it and blown away by it. And so getting to talk to you about this very urgent thing, I think will be really great for the audience of Power Report. So when I first came across Hold the Line, I think it actually might have been something that you sent to me. I was like, okay, yes, this is a cool thing. Finally, there is like a direct document for people to be able to utilize and figure out what to do exactly in this moment. But I'm, of course, like a very politically kind of obsessed, I guess you could say, person. And so, of course, I'm wanting this thing. But what made you kind of realize that or like you and the other co-authors realized that there was a need for this document to exist?
Yeah. So this was a couple months ago. I mean, the work I do on a day-to-day basis is to essentially come up with like ways for everyday people to get involved in different movements. Like that's essentially what I'm constantly trying to experiment with, constantly trying to figure out. And with some of the organizations we were working with, this big question kept popping up of, are we actually doing enough for like this election? Like we're trying to do like the standard, like let's get everybody out to vote work, but are we actually doing enough to make sure that every single person is going to be able to participate this year, and that the election is actually going to be fair and free, and that it's actually going to turn out the way elections are supposed to turn out? And the answer was no. Like we don't know if we're confident in that. And I think like a tipping point happened. I think this was in June, on June 1st. I think you probably remember this too, when this was when the George Floyd protests were happening. And Trump in Washington, D.C., he basically allowed both the military and the police to essentially shoot rubber bullets at protesters. He also threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, which basically gives him the power to use the military against civilians. And that was just like a big red flag for like a lot of us. And I'm sure it was a red flag for people across the country. And it was a realization that the United States is not perfect, and that an authoritarian regime and takeover is very possible here, and we shouldn't fool ourselves in thinking that it's not possible here. I think a lot of people in the United States are used to thinking that that type of stuff happens in other countries because of neoliberalism and Western imperialism, but it is very possible here, and that we all need to be prepared for it. And if you look at previous nonviolent movements in history, people who have taken back their country from authoritarians, from dictators, they've done it through in an organized manner, in a concerted way, working together, and it has taken them months, sometimes years, to actually like succeed. And so we're a couple months out from the election, and no one has a plan. Nobody is talking about this. And this was like a couple months ago when literally no one was talking about it. I think now people are starting to talk about it. It's starting to kind of touch the national narrative a little bit. But as organizers, we were all just like, why are we all not talking about this? And if we are talking about it, what are we actually going to talk about? And so it was basically a freak out conversation, to be quite honest, with my coworker. We were like, okay, maybe we need to start a Facebook group, and just like the whole country could just join this Facebook group. And like we started
Because Facebook will definitely save democracy.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to save democracy through Facebook. I don't know. It started off like as a random conversation, and then we connected with other people who were having these similar anxieties, and essentially the four of us eventually came together. And what's really funny is that the four of us are a totally random group of people. Like Ankur and I both work at the firm, like at M&R. Gifa is actually someone who actually went to Berkeley, and she actually was involved in CalServe, and she was also a senator. Totally random. And then Hardy is a researcher and like the CEO of the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. So he's like the researcher kind of in our group.
So you've got like
kind of just randomly
I was gonna say, you got like a really good team of people there. I mean, like there's a lot of like really inside baseball names there, like CalServe and like all these different things of basically all these different sort of activist spaces within communities of color that are kind of, especially what you have talking about there, getting together to work on this project. So that's like really fascinating. And I want to make the bulk of this interview like a lot of this. I think you have a really good insight into what it's like to become a person in activist spaces. And I want to kind of pick your brain about that, because I think that'll also help to kind of get the idea of hold the line kind of really across. But yeah, I think that feeling of not knowing what to do and how to really react to this kind of situation is something that's really prevalent with people. And this feeling of being sort of paralyzed with not knowing what to do is, I think, not to use too much businessy of a phrase, but it's a market that is super untapped. So like before we really dig into hold the line, I want to ask the question, because you were describing the idea of, oh, a lot of people don't believe this can happen here. And I think I'm going to be talking about a lot of, I think, even though I'm a fan of movement building, I think there are a lot of barriers to movement building in the United States. But one of those is that like, American exceptionalism is a hell of a drug. And we are fed that shit if you are growing up in the United States for decades and decades in what little educational history classes we do have. It's always slavery was a 1 hour lecture, and we all got better after that, and it was kumbaya with all the other nations. Of course, there were bad references, but we all got along, and we all make it right on Thanksgiving. Like we're taught that American exceptionalism is not only this sort of apology for all of the things that have gone wrong with the country and all the misdeeds of the United States, but that like we are at this Francis Fukuyama type of end of history kind of dynamic where America is it. We're always going to be number one or have this sort of hegemony around the world. And I think the reality of not just the things surrounding the Trump administration or the Trump election were showing that that hegemony or that like overall power around the world on the world stage was ending for the United States. But that's all to say. What do you think are some of the like other than what is going on right now, do you think that's going to be a hard sell to people? Is just to tell people like, hey, this could very easily, America could very easily be one of those countries that Anderson Cooper is reporting on CNN in like a tight black shirt, where like there's like disaster and mayhem going around the corner. He's saying, look at this disaster, what's going on behind us. Like that could be America. That could be any country. Americans love to think that that's going to like, oh, that's another country in the global south. That's away from us. No, how do you get Americans to kind of really snap into the understanding that this could happen here right now?
Yeah, I think it's step one is getting rid of that American exceptionalism. Like we are not perfect. We need to unlearn the imperialist history that is just carrying on in our lives. I mean, the fact that honestly, this is a side note, but like the fact that we call ourselves America itself is a problem. It's super small detail, but like we are the United States that exists in North America. We are not the America. You know, there is a South America, there's a North America, there's other countries in the Americas. And it's just this like culture that we all have kind of just embedded ourselves in of thinking that we are the best country in the world and therefore the best people in the world. It's the same culture that that prevents like immigrants from being welcomed fairly, and just completely being vilified, you know? So I think it goes down to the core of us unlearning racism, unlearning like this Western imperialism that has basically like just been like thrown at us at a young age. And it's going to happen through our education system. It's going to happen when each of us takes the ownership upon ourselves to like really like be willing to be uncomfortable and like teach ourselves like, you know, you're going to have to teach yourself. Like there's no like federal government funding that's going to like give you the curriculum, honestly. We live in this country. That's just the reality. So that's like step one. It's like a lot of personal work, in my opinion. The other thing I want to say is that like that I think we're already seeing the fact that the United States is not the best. COVID-19 has done a great job of. I mean, I hate COVID-19 is a horrible thing, but this phenomenon has done a number on giving us like this perspective that our economic system sucks. Our healthcare system sucks. People around us are dying. People around us are like suffering. A lot of us don't have basic needs. Literally, like regular people are getting evicted with no mercy. It's literally a human rights crisis, like across the board. And I think people are starting to see it. I do think so. And that's where like a lot of the unrest, quote unquote, is happening. And it's just a matter of really like taking that unrest and transforming it into positive change. I think the thing that people don't get is that you have the power and the elected officials don't. And I think that's this is the mistake we all kind of, I grew up with even, you know, like I grew up like super, yeah, I grew up in a low income environment. Nobody told me like much about like how government works. My classes were funded by Los Angeles Unified School District, and they like barely invest any funding in like supporting teachers and stuff. And I don't really, in my head, it was like, oh, this person like this person in city council, for example, makes all the decisions. And the reality is that they don't. In like in the Hold the Line guide, there's like an excerpt in there where we talk about how to win in this movement and in this fight, basically, we need to have power, and we need to recognize that elected officials don't actually hold the power. Like Trump can get the military to go like suppress a protest in like Portland and then maybe in Houston, but he does not have the resources, and the federal government doesn't have the resources to suppress a protest across the country with millions of people. And so that is, I think, what the powerful thing is. Like, if we can recognize that, like, you know, like, I don't know if you remember, like, there's like this one graphic actually of like this fish.
Yeah. It's like the, if you like the unite or die kind of thing. It's like the, all the fish joined together are more powerful than the one on its own. And you're talking about like the power that people have. Like, welcome. Can I point to the graphic? Yes, welcome to the show. You're on it. We're here. We're talking about power and like who has it, how people can have more of it. That's really what it is. I really want to get into hold the line while we're like really getting into it. So like, what are the actions that people should be taking between the time they're listening to this podcast, hopefully they're listening before Election Day, and Election Day? And we'll talk about what to do after that, but at least what to do in this like odd sort of like hellstorm moment where we're like in the last couple days or the last couple of weeks of the campaign.
Right. So there's three things people can do. One is get yourself registered to vote. Two is get everybody you know registered to vote, essentially. And when I say registered to vote, it doesn't just mean like go on the website, put in your name. Great, it's done. Elections are kind of complicated in this country and just really hard to understand, honestly. Especially like if you haven't voted before, it's very intimidating to like, let's say if you want to actually go to the polls, it's actually really intimidating to go there. And like it's really hard to see instructions oftentimes. Like you see a line, you get in line and you're just like, okay, am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? Like I feel like there is like a lot of just nervousness around elections too, like especially if you're new to it. So
and that's not even throwing COVID into the mix as well. Like that's gonna make this all worse.
Exactly. It's like, oh my God, do I like stand close to this person? Do I not? Like, why is there not a 6-foot marker here? I don't know. It's like there's going to be a lot of anxiety around elections, just the mechanics of it. And so one thing that I always say, like whenever like we're talking about registering to vote, like it's not just about registering to vote. You need to make a literal plan to the T.
Yes.
You need to call you need to let your employer know, hey, I want to vote, but the lines might be long, so I can't just be gone for my lunch hour. Like I might need to be gone for like 2 to 3 hours to make sure my vote gets in. If you have kids, you want to like arrange for caretaking, like maybe there might be long lines. And so you don't want to like just leave because there's a long line. Like bring water with you, bring your medicine with you, if that's something that you need. Bring a fully charged phone, because if you're just standing there in line, you could look up what's actually on the ballot. Fill out a ballot ahead of time so that when you get there, you're not overwhelmed by all of the boxes and you've actually had a chance to look at what it looks like before. I mean, I remember like one of my my mom's friends, she voted for the first time like in the primaries, and she was so nervous. She's an immigrant woman. She's like never she doesn't speak English very well. She literally did not know who to vote for at all. And she, I mean, we don't even know that she was planning to vote, but she basically called my mom like the day of, like saying, I want to vote, but I don't know how.
Wow.
And we had helped her with her voter registration, but the mistake that I realized we made was we didn't actually help her write down a plan. We didn't say, go to this address, bring this paperwork with you just in case. We didn't say like, this is what is actually going to happen. And so like it was very like I literally like got off of work. I like took my lunch break and I was talking to her on the phone. I was like, okay, auntie, okay, when you get there, call me. And then she called me, and then like I basically like helped her go through the whole ballot, explained to her like things, but it was me explaining it from like my room. And like there was nobody at like the polling place necessarily explaining anything to her. And so like that, I think that's just like an example of, I think, that is the experience that everybody goes through, and that I wish we didn't have to go through just to exercise our right that we have and the power that we have to essentially control like how our lives are going to turn out in the next couple of years. Like that's what elections are. You are making active decisions on how you want your community to look like in like a couple of years. And I'm not just talking about presidential election, I'm talking about local election. Those people that you vote for, like they are going to be the ones determining a lot of things that impact, just what you see on a day-to-day basis on your street. And people, I think that connection is so hard. Like I think about how my family interacts with elections too, and it's like there's a disconnect. They think voting is one thing, but they don't realize that voting for that person can translate into this actual thing that has occurred in our community, and so yeah, anyways, that was like a rant.
But like but going off of that, like I think it's hard, especially in communities of color, because there's a lot of cynicism that I'm holding my cynicism gun. I'll be drawing that shortly, totally. But like we'll hold on to that. But like communities of color, not just like, let alone the Republican Party, which is like lied to them as well as they've lied to everyone and promised them things they weren't going to get. But like Democrats have also done their fair share of promising things that Democrats had no intent of delivering on, saying that they would defend these communities while like secretly and covertly approving measures to spy on these communities or over police these communities. And so there's a lot of healthy and also unhealthy skepticism within a lot of cultures. And even then, like, I think what you were even getting at right there is how important it is to build a plan around voting. And by plan, it's like not just getting up there to vote, but also knowing what your ballot looks like, who is potentially running, because there's also the experience of being overwhelmed by how much there is to vote for. Like there's all these, in California especially, there's propositions and there's judges and council chiefs and all this different stuff. So it helps to utilize whatever is in your state. As far as like voter guides go, usually the Secretary of State for whatever state you're in has voter information on their website, and your like county Secretary of State as well. A lot of people get mailed out voter guides as well, as I know. So I think that's really important to like make a plan for election day so that you are able to, if possible, get time off of work and allow yourself that space to vote or take care of kids or whatever, but also know what you're going to do once you get in there and to make that process as easy as possible. I also emphasize vote by mail if it's not too late to do that, although in many states it is. And that's like a whole mess too. But mainly like if we're going through like the 4 parts of Hold the Line and the action document that is available in the description of the video version of this podcast as well as the show notes. But mainly, other than, as far as still the pre-election part of things go, other than making a plan to vote, is there any major thing people can do, like volunteering as a poll worker or anything else like that for like holding the line?
Yes. Yeah. So the first 2 things I would say are definitely like register to vote, make a plan to vote, and then help other people register to vote and then make a plan to vote. And then the third most important thing I think is signing up to be a poll worker. So this is like a new thing. It's not a new thing, but I think around more than 50% of poll workers in the 2016 election were like over 61 years old. And with COVID-19, a lot of older folks, like it is dangerous for them to essentially be out there. And so what we are anticipating is we're going to see a shortage in poll workers across the country. Just to give like a case example, which is actually outlined in the guide, but I think it's like it shows like a very clear, it clearly really shows the impact of poll workers in the election. So in Milwaukee, which is in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the 2016 election, there were 182 polling places that were open. And this was like obviously before COVID, right? And so at this primary that just happened, it went from 182 to 5 because of the fact that there were not enough polling workers and polling places needed to be consolidated. And so we're anticipating across the country, this is definitely going to happen. Especially in areas where the normal population of poll workers who often volunteered were older. And so it's kind of like up to the young people here. We got to like turn out.
I'm still kind of,
be a poll worker.
I'm blown out by your statement of going from like 182 or some number like that to 5 polling stations in the entire city. The city of Milwaukee, which like for Wisconsin, it's a fairly homogenous state, let's say. It's a large state. It's a homogenous state largely, except for those like urban centers in those urban areas. Kenosha, Wisconsin is another one of those like sort of examples and outliers there. So these poll closures are happening in places where it's very deliberate. These poll closures are happening in places where people of color are more likely to turn out and vote to overturn the power establishment. And also, it's not just people of color, just like regular like working class white folks who were also put down the ringer of capitalism in this case and are taught to pit themselves against other people of color to distract from the fact the rich people are looting the system. But enough about that.
And in Milwaukee, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
In Milwaukee, actually, like the turnout for in the primary this year, it went down by 37%. So like,
Jesus.
Yeah, that's huge. Like those types of margins will be the difference between like who actually wins this election.
In a swing state like Wisconsin, it's definitely like on the board. A lot of like people on the left, if we're doing like a journal right now of this time being in like late September, people are decreeing, oh, Joe Biden's going to sweep and do really well in all these swing states. He might even pick up Texas and et cetera. And maybe he will, maybe he won't. But I've learned the hard way to not lean in and let my guard down when polling shows the favorable things in general. I just like there's so many factors going on this year, especially that are working against the vote that even I, as like a smug California, Los Angeles voter in a very deeply blue district who would usually use this opportunity to not care about the top of the ticket and vote extremely down ballot. I'm worried about making sure my ballot counts when I know other people's won't. So I'm taking even my vote more seriously. So it's rough times. And if it's okay, I think I want to move on to like kind of part two, because I think that's where, I mean, at least like for me, it gets really juicy of Hold the Line. So part two is kind of just like election day scenarios. It posts a bunch of different scenarios for what could happen on election day, what the potential power players, let's say, could do at this time. And so I've had a track record on this podcast of being like a doomsayer about saying election day is going to be a shit show. We're not going to have a definite like winner on the night of, and anyone who tries to be a winner on the night of is probably trying to do some spin to get ahead of the game, because that's really powerful to claim yourself to be the victor when you're not actually the victor. Hashtag beat Buttigieg. But like there's going to be that issue that's happening. There's going to be a lot of people who are there's going to be a lot of votes coming in, especially from California. So like I think it's going to be a mess, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's like protests / riots in the streets after this, unfortunately, because of our political climate. But are you possibly able to grace our listeners and viewers with some rosier scenarios for what could happen on election day, or am I just on the right path?
You're on a plausible path.
But you heard it from an expert. That's just not just me. I heard it from an expert now. So.
So we outlined 3 scenarios in the guide. Of course, there are multiple other scenarios that could totally play out. And the reason we went with these 3 particular scenarios because they're kind of like more general buckets of what could actually happen. So I can like break them down real quick. So the first scenario is election day results are super unclear, and then Trump just declares victory anyway. And so this would kind of look like, like mail-in ballots are still coming in, right? They haven't been counted yet, but Trump has already like set the stage for saying that mail-in ballots are like fraudulent, So there's like, opportunity for him to kind of play out this scenario. There's like a lot of other scenarios that could go down too. Like even if if the election day results are unclear, ballots are still coming in, Attorney General Bill Barr could jump in and basically start an investigation into the Biden campaign, halting the counting of the ballots, confiscating the ballots. Postmaster DeJoy can essentially slow down delivery of the mail-in ballots and deliver them a little too late to be counted. There's like a lot of things that could essentially happen, but the main thing is that this is a scenario where nobody really knows who the winner is. Votes are still being counted here and there, and there's also accusations in the air that the votes are invalid and that Biden is essentially trying to cheat. And so the line that we outlined that we want to hold essentially with this scenario is that every vote needs to be counted without interference or intimidation. And this particular line, we can actually start holding starting today. So we can start organizing proactively before, and then also organize the day of election day, and then from election day to inauguration day. So that's like the first scenario. The second scenario is around like the election results show that there's like a lot of irregularities or like signs of tampering and stuff. There's been evidence in this country in previous election years, like there have been evidence of like electronic voting machines switching their votes. I think there was like a story about like Indiana. In Indiana, they're like the votes were constantly being switched for multiple elections, and that is very likely to happen again. There's other questions around like in areas where there is an even split between Republican and Democrat voters. Like there could likely be irregularities where there's a huge like a Republican win, and that type of margin doesn't make sense, or like there's more people that voted than actually exist in like the county, for example. So the other scenario that we kind of outlined is there could be a chance that different irregularities could show up, And as everyday people, it's on us to make sure that those irregularities are investigated without any type of without any interference, and that they're investigated fairly and immediately. So that's like scenario number 2. And I guess the line to hold. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could just pause there for a moment, like what is the difference between like a Bill Barr style, we're gonna try to rush in and take power as we're coming in, and the Trump camp trying to muddy the waters about what is an election irregularity versus what we should see as a, hey, there's some madness going on in Cuyahoga County or whatever, and so we've got to like investigate that. Like, how should a regular concerned person kind of like understand what the difference is? Is it the source, or like how would we be able to tell?
I think that I don't think it necessarily has to do with whether or not what Trump is doing necessarily. Like, I think what it goes down to is, as a regular person, you have power over your locality. You have power, not that you have power over your election officials, but you can identify who the election official is in your county. You can like remind them starting now that it's their constitutional duty to make sure that the vote is counted fairly. And that they need to do everything in their power to make sure that votes are counted fairly, essentially. So you can like put pressure that way. So I think the bottom line is, where you are, you should be watching for those irregularities that pop up. So that does require doing some homework. And like what Trump may be doing during, like, all this is possibly going to happen at the same time, right? Like, these scenarios aren't like distinct scenarios. Like, they could possibly all happen together at the same time too.
There's a lot of overlap for sure.
There's a lot of overlap. So Trump could definitely possibly be trying to do, like, you know, like Bill Barr could totally like go in and try to confiscate different ballots, etc. But if that's happening in your county, you can stop him. Like, there are election officials who can stand up to Bill Barr and to like Trump, you know? And so knowing who those people are and applying pressure to those people is what you can do in all of these scenarios. And that's essentially what we outline later on in the guide of, from where you're at, like, who are the power players? Who are the people that you can start you need to essentially figure out who they are, and then what can you do to hold them accountable and also make sure they do the right thing. And for a point of clarification here, like, the guide is essentially like a guide to protect democracy. It's not a guide to get Biden elected. Obviously, like, we have very grave concerns if Trump would get elected, and that is not a scenario that we would like. But if Trump gets elected legitimately through a fair election, then, I mean, we are still upholding democracy. So the point of this...
I know there even might be some folks in the audience who are like, the democracy was never legitimate in the first place. And like, like, I'm not going to wholly disagree with that statement either, but I think it is just wholly delusional at this point to look at the threat that Donald Trump is posing to the limited structures that do exist. I mean, I'm holding out hope in something that's likely not going to come to fruition the way I want it to, but I'm still holding out hope that like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and like maybe a Democratic majority in the House and possibly in the Senate, although not likely, I'm hoping that they at least have like a country to run when all is said and done. But like, it's very clear what happens if the Republicans are able to keep power. It's even very clear what happens if they're even able to fill a Supreme Court seat. It's disastrous. So not to derail you again, right. Like, I think it's just like, that's very important.
And I totally agree. And with the folks who are saying that, I actually completely agree with you. Like, what we have left of democracy is like a tiny little like sliver, to be quite honest. Like, voter suppression has been happening for like years, for centuries. And like, people don't technically everyone in this country has not actually had access to influence this country and make decisions for their future, right? And so democracy has failed people down. Like, democracy in the way it has been run so far has definitely failed in this country multiple times. But what we're talking about here is, we're kind of at like the last line here. And once this line gets crossed, getting back on the other side will be even more difficult than we've already had to deal with. And we've already seen like how like the effect of like Trump in power and like what he's done to already destroy democracy bit by bit. But this is kind of like, I don't know, this is like what's like in the games, oh my God, I'm totally
in
blanking.
The sports.
In this. Anyways, whatever. This is basically, not to be like doomsday again. And I know I know you resonate with me in this respect, but this is basically the end, essentially. And so this is essentially the line we need to hold. And then the other thing I do want to make a point of, the tactics and the instructions we basically outline in this guide, they're not just meant to be used to like protect the 2020 election and then everybody go to sleep after. Like what we are doing is building democracy insurance. We are starting out now to build it out now, but like the effect of organizing in this particular way will create groups and communities who are going to be more engaged, who are going to be able to understand the system a little bit more. And that in itself is going to bring us closer to getting to a better democracy than we've had before as well.
So getting into part 3 a little bit, what could you explain to the audience what election protection groups are? So like those are the scenarios that we just like kind of see are potentially there. And of course we encourage folks to check out the full guide to get all the detailed information. That there's a lot in there, but like any question you have will probably be answered by that document if you look into it. But yeah, could you explain for the audience what election protection groups are?
Yeah, so we call them election protection groups because it's essentially like what you're doing. You are protecting the election. And honestly, it's literally just a group of people getting together, doing homework together, essentially, doing their research and figuring out who the players are in their area that they can hold accountable to stop Trump from cheating his way to another 4 years. And essentially like responding. And so we break it down into two different like phases, essentially. Well, not two different phases. There's like 4 different steps actually that we outline. And obviously there will be more steps that will be needed, but these are the first 4 steps you can take essentially to get yourself set up. So like step 1 is create your team. And by team, it doesn't mean like you're gonna like have to like recruit like 20 different people. Like you and one other person is still a team, honestly. And the fact that you're even gathering together to even start having a conversation around this is getting us still closer to protecting our democracy, to be quite honest. Our biggest flaw in like losing our democracy is the fact that we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about our systems enough. We don't like make it a normal part of our conversations. We don't make the structures and the systems a normal part of our conversation. And that's why we're like so removed from it now. But anyway, so that's step 1, create your team. Step 2 is make a response plan. And in the guide, we kind of like outline like how to go about that. Step 3 is like figuring out roles amongst your team and then starting to recruit support amongst your local community. And then step 4 is like preparing yourself to execute essentially if based off of like your response plan. The step 2, I think, is like the most important one. This is like where like traditional organizing, this is where we all kind of put our organizing brains together. And this is what organizers essentially do. Like when you want to solve for a problem, you figure out who the people are who hold power. Then you put them like on a map and you figure out, okay, like, can I influence this person? Can I not influence this person? What is the research behind all of these individuals? And then you figure out who is the one individual that you need to talk to basically get to your goal. And so that is essentially what we do in step 2 of the guide. We basically help you go through step by step of how do you actually go about figuring out who the power players are in your local community, who you need to talk to, like who do you need to call and tell them that you are concerned about what's happening. And then after you call them, what do you need to do if you see that the lines are being crossed both nationally and locally? So yeah, so that's like a quick overview of the guide of the steps.
So it's really just like figuring out, you're getting a team together. You're just kind of distributing the work because, as I've talked about in some of my previous work, when you're starting in an activist sort of space, it's very easy to burn out. There's a study that it's not, it's hard to really replicate these kind of findings, but whatever, they're out there. About 50% of the people who burn out from activism just like quit and never return to it. So you want to create a sustainable, lasting sort of thing. You were even talking about earlier about how a lot of this stuff talked about in Hold the Line can be very useful after election day, after inauguration day, for whatever happens in the future. These are good building blocks for that. So having that team of minimum 2, but as many as you can work with and manage and create a symbiotic, helpful like relationship with, are definitely useful for that. And then from there, building out a plan as far as what are the key power players, whether it's a mayor or chief of police or like whatever quasi accountable people that exist that you can keep accountable, that you can hold pressure to, really keeping in mind that at the end of the day, these people who are elected in power feel accountable because they haven't felt the pressure of attention yet. And by showing them more attention and actually making them fear for their jobs at minimum, that there can actually be progress done, and history has shown that pretty well. So I think that's all very good to like kind of get together and lay out for people and really kind of condition people to bring in and have. And now is for my like Whomper question. And it's not like a really like major thing. It's just like I guess the thing I've been most hit by with 2020, that's a dramatic statement, but I'll go with it. The thing I've been hit most with in 2020 is not necessarily that there are all of these calamities, like there's coronavirus, COVID-19, there are the fires that are going on, there's racial injustice, there is the crimes that are happening at our southern border. All this stuff is going on, and it's not that it's all going on right now. All this stuff has been in the making and in a relatively public eye for years. It's not like I'm the first one hearing about this. It's not like a lot of the people who have been politically engaged for the past year, 2 years, 5 years, decades are just hearing about all this stuff. It's just that, yeah, all the very conservative fears of the political scientists and social scientists and economists and everyone else, what they were predicting were like, oh yeah, these trends are going to get worse and at some point it's going to come to a head. And it has now. We're seeing all of this stuff happening. And like I said, the thing that's made me most kind of upset with 2020 is that we, as a society, allowed it to get to this point, and we're kind of responding with complacency. And a lot of that complacency has to do with the fact that we all work like 9-to-5 jobs, or many of us work 9-to-5 jobs that burn us out. Those that don't work jobs or don't work steady jobs are burned out looking for jobs, or burned out by the economic or social or psychological pressure that creates, because our society ties having a job to having the ability to live through like health insurance and having a home and all these other things. So like, I guess maybe the darker version of me is what I'm trying to say is that I think these are the kind of things that like revolutions get started over. Not bloody revolutions, but like people choosing to strike for days on end until their demands are met. People saying, we're not going to allow you to evict people in a crisis. You're going to like make it work for people, or else we're going to like close down the eviction courts or something like that. Whatever, like, why aren't these like daily mass movements going on in the streets? And like, I thought I saw some of that during the George Floyd demonstrations, and people were saying, wow, people's minds are changing. These protests are going on for days and days. The police are getting overwhelmed. They're tired of going out there every single day. We might be actually breaking them. And I was just like, no, you're not going to, because there's nothing more powerful than the drug of American exceptionalism. And with that comes individualism, the idea that everyone can work by themselves and make it through society. And even when we see that very clearly not happening, I think that's the hardest thing to kind of deprogram from people, is this idea that we can only function as individuals. We can't cooperate as a collective and get anything done. And so I think that's going to be a lot of the difficult process, is like, in Hold the Line, you provide a framework for power and activism, and it's really cohesive and it's really good there. But like, I almost have to, in my darkest moments, especially this year, wonder like, are the people ready for it, is basically what I'm saying. Like, how do you convince a public that is so complacent, is sort of like jaded by everything that's going on, other than like creating a pressure cooker situation, which is going to end up being really violent? How do you really, like, it's kind of the question we had in the beginning, how do you really motivate people to take that next step and decide that, okay, I need to be active, I need to start reading some plans and making organization, because this is like do or die for the entire system that I know and love?
I would say I think what's really interesting is that one interesting that you've said, interesting thing that you mentioned was people are complacent despite seeing all of these atrocities around them. Like even like people who are directly impacted, like this even if those folks who are getting evicted right now, or like other like communities who are watching it happen, nobody really seems to be taking action a lot of the time. And I think that actually has to do with a strategy that the oppressor does a really good job of, and that is making you feel like it's your fault. Um, often like, and this kind of goes in line with like how capitalism kind of works, like this whole idea of like pull yourself up from the bootstraps and everything. Like it's your fault that you're not making enough money. It's your fault that you're homeless. It's your fault that, you know, you're sick and I don't know, you can't get seen like at the hospital. I think that type of narrative is what kind of, once you realize that it is not your fault and explicitly start saying it is an individual that made a decision to stop you from making enough money. It is a corporation that made that active decision to take away your health care. I think like once you start using active voice instead of passive voice, you start seeing that like it's not your fault. Like it is these systems and these individuals, frankly, are the ones attacking you on a regular basis every single day. And once you see someone who's starting to attack you, I feel like you realize, oh wait, like this is not my fault. Like I can actually, there's somebody else is hurting me and I can stop them. Is I think like the thought process that we need to start going towards and away from, like, you know, for example, like the black community is just has disproportionately has higher like mortality rates. Like that is passive voice. What we should be saying is like individuals in the black community are being killed through like the deliberate cuts in funding to healthcare. Like
Yeah.
there's a change in how we talk about things that needs to happen, and it needs to be away from victim blaming. It needs to be away from blaming the individual that's actually dealing with the problem, because it's not their fault. It's not like I hate saying like, oh, you didn't go out to vote and you're the one who like didn't make the right decision, or I don't know, like it's like you were being lazy. No, they didn't go out to vote because they were prevented from voting because they work a 9-to-5 job, where like if they do not show up to work, they will literally get fired and not be able to put food on their table. You know, like it's not their fault. And once you tell them it's not your fault and that somebody's out to get, not that somebody's out to get you, but kind of somebody is kind of out to get you. I think it wakes something up in people, because and I'm speaking from personal experience. I think it woke something up in me, like just realizing that, like, you know, my like quote unquote success, or like the way like my family grew up, it's not my family's fault. Like they are not less than. And having going through that realization, I think really woke that up, and it just made me want to actually do something about it, because it actually, I think it's empowering actually to know that it is not your fault. And then it gives you that drive to figure out, okay, well, if it's not my fault, well, I'm going to stop you from making my life worse, because this is something that I can do. I don't know. That's how I kind of approach like some of those thoughts. And that I feel like that's kind of like what's worked for me.
I, I
Yeah.
I like a lot of where that's coming from. I think that kind of transition, it's such a very simple thing the way you put it, but like active to passive, or passive to active voice. It's not that, oh, these things are happening and that's just, life's unfair. It just happens to people. No, these are actual results. Like, as I was just saying, these are the results of things that we've been tracking in society for decades. We can look at systemic racism. We can look at sexism. We can look at poverty. We can look at all these different things as a trend. And we can also look and say, isn't it really interesting that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have made billions of dollars this year alone, while many of their workers at their companies are struggling, or many of them are suffering? Like, how is it that the system isn't fair? And of course, life doesn't have to be fair, but our system is something that is created by people. And I think we've just lost a lot of agency in that through, I think, years of conservative propaganda, for sure. But I think a lot of the antidote to that, I think you're right, is to say, like, no, just as easily as we've been sold the propaganda of American exceptionalism, we've also been sold the propaganda of the government is big and unaccountable and you can't do anything about it. No, I mean, it is big, and at many times it can overgrow its control, and it's very close to becoming out of our control. But it's designed with a lot of kill switches, really. It's designed with a lot of different ways to kind of go in there. And yes, it's kind of labyrinthine and kind of archaic to go through all of the systems, but we can use the power that we have as people unify to pool our resources and pool our knowledge into overcoming these systems and battling these systems. And I think another way we can really learn is like off of history and learn what people did before us, even in
Yes.
recent history. So I was actually going to
Oh
ask
yeah.
like the most logical comparison I kind of have, even if I'm coming off the top of my head, as to like what this kind of is, without while also noting that it's going to sound like a pejorative just based off of what we've come to in this country now, is that this seems like a lot of what the best intentions of like the hashtag resistance and the what is it called, the indivisible groups did, at least early on, where they're like, we're going to protest the inauguration, we're going to have the women's march, we're going to have these like early shows of force for the Trump administration that seemed like they did good at, you know, signs and protest and discourse. But when it came towards like the next step that you're like seem to be kind of getting at of like claiming real and tangible power, those movements fell short, and then like they became a pejorative of like doing that, of promising a lot and trying to whip up a frenzy, but ultimately falling short and caving in to many of the same pressures that got us to this issue in the first place. So is there anything you think you can learn from movements like Indivisible or things like that that have even happened as counter insurgencies to the Trump administration? And do you think that's something that Hold the Line can sort of help to remedy?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful movements that have had sustained impact for years to come, I think, are led by those who are directly impacted. I think one of the places where like the Women's March and like other, you know, efforts fall short is that they didn't represent like the most impacted people in this country. Like those people were not involved, honestly. Like I'm always fascinated by conversations I have with white women, for example, at how confident they are in like just being able to get something done or get like an elected official to listen to them. And then I go and I listen to like my mom's like auntie friends, and it's just like it is a completely different narrative. Like they're experiencing completely something so different because that indivisible guy just didn't land in front of their in their world. It's just not a part of their world, and no one really tried to put it in their world. And I think that is one of the biggest flaws. Like those communities, nobody really made an effort to put those resources and these tactics and these strategies, put it in their world and translate it to for them to use. I mean, like I think about I speak a lot from like my own immigrant like parent experience. Like my family, like our families knew, like they know what movement is, like they know what resistance looks like, they know what like holding like a government accountable looks like. But when they come here, it's like completely like foreign to them, right? But nobody tried to like invite them to the party, you know, or even let them be a part of the party if they were trying to do it themselves, you know. So I think that's the biggest flaw. And I think I don't have an answer, I guess, to like how the Hold the Line guide is essentially going to not do what those other guides did. I think I guess my answer is get in front of the people who are directly impacted in this country and get this guide in front of them and make it work for them and accessible to them. Like that is like my goal, honestly. Like, and that is like I also just need to figure that out too. I think we as a group are still figuring that out. Like, how do you actually do that? If you think about it, like the people that wrote this guide, there's like three Desi people in that group and like one white guy. Um, and like that, like most of them are with a wide like very like you know with difference in ages and stuff. Like slightly different economic backgrounds, but obviously we're not representative of like the most directly impacted people in this country, right? And so this is a challenge that we are constantly coming up against. Like, how do you actually get something like this in front of those people in a way that's not like colonizing them? Honestly, I think like a lot of movements have like you know this subtle like version of like colonization that they still carry on with them. So that is a question that I mean I have not figured it out yet either. But I think that whoever figures that out, and hopefully we can figure that out. Once we do, like it will definitely solve for a lot of the problems that you talked about.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's a big balance because even I notice as being like adjacent and seeing a lot of the strides that movements like Democratic Socialists of America have had in like building a political force, along with the downsides in that it is still struggling as being in a lot of places a very white movement and a movement that is led still very top down instead of bottom up as we would like a more like equitable sort of like organization and movement to be. There's always that question of like organization versus disorganization. That could be like a separate podcast we could both do and talk to about in great length, I'm sure. But I think about like how do we break past this extremely online, super hyper focused into politics bubble that like, for lack of a better phrase, like you and I and at least half the people who are going to end up seeing this guide are going to be a part of. And I think it's just about making sure that, you know, like sports fans talk to other sports fans, more particularly like hockey fans talk to other hockey fans, or like basketball fans talk to other basketball fans. But usually like political people only talk to other political people, when instead that's our problem. We need to expand the political universe, and that means uncomfortable conversations or even comfortable conversations with people you haven't talked to, or who are your neighbors or your coworkers, or people who you think you could move the needle on any of these issues, to help them say like, hey, politics is like an active thing, and even if we disagree on some issues here or there, we can unite on like the most important ones about class injustice and racial injustice and all the other like sort of social inequality issues in this country, and fight to at least have a leveler playing field for where we do disagree. I think just like what you're saying right there, that figuring out where to break outside of our own existing bubbles when we're educating other people about these things is like the next frontier for these things. And comedy has worked a little bit. Different forms of doing a political thing, like some people like the Weekly or these other things like that, and I hope Power Report's one of those as well. But yeah, I think that would be the next big frontier, is like, how do you expand the universe of politically engaged people who are willing to make this step beyond like armchair activism and really get involved.
Yeah, and I think like if you look at the history of movements, they weren't based off of political people talking to political people. It was literally like your neighbor checking up on you and just making sure you were okay. Or like, you know, like your coworker or something, like the farm workers movement, for example, like all the coworkers got together and they did something together, you know? And so it's like my tip actually for watchers, or this is a podcast, yes. So, listeners
and watchers, because they'll be on video too. But whoever's
it
in
is
the
a video
audience,
podcast,
yes.
right? So, my tip for watchers and listeners and anyone who picks up this guide is actually challenge yourself to go outside of that comfort zone and knock on your neighbor's door. Find the people who you interact with in your daily life. Like, I don't know, like if you see like the same person you walk by on the street, like every Saturday for your walk, like, I don't know, the barista who like makes your coffee, or like, you know, like, or if like the customer that you see like at your job or something, like literally the regular people that show up in your life, that you have like these subtle traditions with in a way, reach out to them, because you already have a relationship with them. And community organizing doesn't start with issues, it starts with relationships. And that is what we've seen throughout history. That's what all the research shows. People are not actually like, people don't join organizations because they're just passionate about the issue. They oftentimes actually join them because they're going to find community in there, in that organization, and they're going to find a place where they feel welcomed. And so that is that's the tip I would just give to people. Like, have those conversations with the regular people in your life, and don't just go find like the one political person that's already on your side, essentially, and already thinking about these things.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like we said about just expanding the political universe, but also like when you are doing the work, the tough work of actually doing activism, it helps when you have a community of people you're working with who like you don't hate and you like agree with on certain things, and you can actually work together on stuff. It turns out that's helpful to run an organization when you do those things. Take notes, Congress. But like I think it also getting at that aspect that we, in a lot of ways, are lacking a lot of sense of community in this country. I think, again, because of American exceptionalism, hell of a drug. Like, we're learned to be individualist, and even that kind of mindset teaches a lot about like religious fundamentalism, and it really centers like Christianity-centric sort of like ideology in its way of being an individual American. But yeah, we, even with COVID notwithstanding, we have fewer places where people can get together and really spend time as a community. I mean, work isn't really that place because the power dynamics are kind of off. It's not really like that really exists at bars or a lot of social things, and many of those other social things where people just usually just randomly meet together are not really in existence because of COVID. So activism is the next fun thing to do to get closer to your community, I guess. But it's also just something that's like more fun and more productive than being on like your neighborhood watch or your local housing homeowners association. That's the phrase I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
This has been like a good example of like the four places of about Hold the Line. Again, holdthelineguide.com is where folks can kind of find information about this. But as we kind of wind down, we kind of covered the gamut of not only what Hold the Line is, but kind of the aspects of what it takes to make that next step and become someone who is engaged more in activist spaces. And we touched about this a little bit with your own experience and your own personality and like what brought you into this. And I'm glad that you can have that kind of experience to show off of and talk of and use that to inform the guide that you've created because now you're teaching other people how to do it themselves. So I guess that's what I kind of wanted to go into just to wrap up is like, what was your journey into deciding that, okay, I know that a lot of people aren't going to take the steps that I'm going to take, but not only am I going to be someone who is engaged in politics, but I'm going to work to engage other people as well. Like how people don't usually start like that. So like, what was your like awakening, I guess?
Yeah, and I'll say actually it was a very gradual process. I um I think when people think of politics and like these types of issues and whenever we have conversations on these types of things, they think that you want to become like a politician or something. And that's not true. Like I came in, I basically after graduating from college did not want to be a politician, but I wanted to do something that basically got rid of the injustices around me because the injustices pissed me off and they were very like they really impacted me a lot on an emotional level. And so my first step was actually, okay, like what can I do to just like do my part in helping to remove some of these injustices or make them less intense. Like that was like literally my first step. It was not, it didn't start off as like, I want to get involved and I want to then get the whole country involved. It was, I think what happens is you take that first step around this is something that really hit home for me because it's either connected to my childhood or like to my life or people I care about. And I can't just stand here and watch it continue. And I think that was the first step. Like I just cannot continue doing like just watching. And so taking that first step means, okay, I want to figure out how to not just stand here and just watch the injustice from happening. And so I think that is the first step that most people take of just, I need to do something. I don't know what it is, but I need to do something. And then as you take the first step, you realize, okay, I'm actually good at this. Naturally, and I like doing this, and so I'm going to continue doing it. And then once you start like getting more involved, I don't know if like you become like more of a leader in like your space, like you realize that you just learn things along the way and you'll start to realize that you need to bring other people in to make like a lot of these movements work. And so I guess like what I'm trying to say is like when I first like decided to I didn't actually decide to become an organizer. I think I accidentally became one, and I think a lot of people actually go through that experience. But the first step was really just wanting to just stop the pain, to be quite honest. I think that was really just the first thing. And I was lucky enough to find a path, and then find mentors, and then like find a bigger vision, and then realize that, oh, wait, there's like a whole system behind how organizing works. And then you get excited about it. And then you realize that this is something that you can actually invest more and more of your time in. But what I'm trying to say is that everyone's journey in the world of movement building is very different. Um, and I think that this is super cheesy, but you really just have to follow your heart. You have to find the place where your heart feels full and happy, and also where you feel the power that you were looking for to stop that pain from hurting the people you care about. And if you're feeling all of that, you're in the movement space. And you don't have to be a part of like a big nonprofit to feel it. Like you could be feeling it in your neighborhood where you get together a group of people and you sit in, or you create a healing space in your living room. Like that's you being a part of the movement. It could literally be you and like your old college friends having a reunion on Zoom or something, and you talking about a very specific bill that hits home for you and maybe affects your parents, that you want them to like vote around and also get all of their family to vote around you. That's you being like an organizer. That's you being part of the movement. Like, and I think that is where you start, and then it will take you where you need to go. I know that sounds super vague. In terms of like actual tangible things you can like access to go to where you want to go, like I think like, like having conversations with people is step one. There are a lot of organizations around you, oftentimes like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I think are great at helping people find those spaces. So find a space, like, get to know them. If you feel like you fit in, keep working, volunteering with that nonprofit or that organization. If you don't, then go and find another one and just keep talking to people and finding your own, like figuring out where do you fit into this movement. Is kind of like the big question that I think people kind of have to answer. But yeah, that's how it worked out for me. And I do like, I don't like creating like a full on formula for people because I think everybody is so different. Everyone has so many other things going on in their lives. And it's less about like you becoming an organizer and more about how do you fit in movement building into your life? Like because it should be actually integrated into your life. It shouldn't just be like this like side thing that you do, and that's why it looks different for everyone because everyone has different lives. Yeah.
No, it literally, I love everything you're saying. I agree with it a lot. I especially resonate with the oftentimes you don't find out you're becoming an organizer or a leader until like you've just been thrown into the position, like you accidentally waltz into the position.
Yeah.
As definitely a lot of situations I've done that to myself in before, but
Totally.
that's really good. I guess the last thing I guess I really want to get at, because you made a good point that I tried and I struggled a lot actually in my last video, Bad News, about like how do I create a path for activism, because everyone comes at it at a different way. But I also understand if you're new and you generally want to get involved, it would help to have like a activism explained article or something like that. So I try to do my best to present that. But yeah, it's really just about how you're able to plug in and network and get involved with that group or that organization that works better with you. And I'll link to my Bad News video for like self-indulgence and also like more information about getting into that as well. But is there any other place that like you found as like a really good online resource that you kept coming back to for activists? Like, this is kind of unrelated, but for voting, I highly recommend Ballotpedia. It's like a pretty good reputable, like it's a lot of people who are checking it, source for different ballot measures and initiatives and people who are running around you. But like that's very specific to voting. As far as like there's no like Wikipedia for like how to be a good leftist organizer, but like are there any places where like you kept going back to this or back to a couple of different resources, like, oh, they have some really insightful things? Because I think that'd be really great for the audience to also find out about as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like organizing trainings out there. The ones that I kind of started using was with Repower. So they're like a really cool like training organization that kind of breaks down trainings for new organizers and people that are kind of new. I think you have to pay for some of them, but like that's like if you're trying to be like a professional. But they have like a lot of resources on their website. There's actually this book. Hold on. I'm gonna like find it real quick. 1 second. I'm like in my room right now. Yeah. So this book actually. So it's called. This was with the Midwest Academy. This is like this like another organizing institution, but it's called Organizing for Social Change, Midwest Academy Manual for Activists. So it's like literally a manual. A lot of organizations use this actually when they're training like new organizers. And it has like a lot of great like fundamental theories that are really great. There's also like a lot of researchers actually out there who do like a lot of research around how organizing works. Hari Hahn, for example, does like really great work around that. I can actually, if you want, I can send a list of like suggested readings for like new people who are like kind of new to the space and new to organizing and want to like get their feet wet. So I can definitely send that to you.
That'll be awesome.
To
and
share with
I'll include that in the description of the video and the show notes of the podcast if you're listening in the audience of that. But no, Marium, thank you so much for spending your time with me and with the audience, kind of really digging into, like I said, not just hold the line, but like how to actually like get your like hands and feet dirty and really get involved. Because I mean, that's what saving and preserving the semblance of a democracy that we have left is going to take. It's going to take folks like you and I and the people listening to really get involved and plug in wherever they can. So really fast, where can people find Hold the Line? Where can people find you? Anything else you like want to promote and let the audience know about?
Yeah, we're gonna be posting a lot more on social, so you can follow us at the Red Line on Instagram and Twitter, and hopefully, and then the link to our guide is also on those social pages. So feel free to read those, and then again, like we have an email on there too. So if you just want to talk to us, like we're available. Like feel free to email us. We're happy to chat. Yeah.
Awesome. Last question. What do you do to manage your time?
Do I manage my time? I don't know.
That's the sneaky tough one I was talking about. You thought the tough question was earlier. No. I save it for last.
I know. I thought we were getting deep, and I was like, "Ooh, this is a tough question." So I'm a bullet journal nerd. Part of the Bujo community.
This is the shit I loved about leaving San Francisco, by the way. Is not hearing those abbreviations. I'm kidding. Continue. Go on.
I know, right? This is like such a California thing. But I have bullet journal. This is my bullet journal right here. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm like very proud of it. Okay, well, you probably can't see it.
We can see it, yeah.
I use it to organize my day. I have like a tracker in there that tracks this is so like horrible, but like I have a tracker that tracks my habits, and every month I actually calculate my my success rates at like actually building up these habits, because I can track like how many days I did the thing and I didn't. So I'm a scientist at heart, so I majored in biochem, so my Bujo is very much like a science experiment on me. That's how I organize my time.
No, for what it's worth, I basically treat Google Calendar as my Bible, so much so that I have blocked out time in my day to just like check in with myself and make sure like I'm doing okay. Like what do I need like mentally and physically, and like I've actually found that reminds me to do like wellness and like what is it, like self-presence kind of checks and make sure I'm doing well. But like I totally vibe with you on that, like meta experiencing myself and like meta planning myself. Like it's a vibe. This is why they send us to Berkeley. It's definitely not our parents paying money for it.
It's like, Mom, this is the one thing I learned.
I thoroughly enjoyed that interview. Thanks again to Marium Navid and all the folks at Hold the Line Guide for helping to get that together, for putting the guide together, and for actually having a plan to help save our country. Like I said, I'm not sure if we really had a democracy for all of the people, all of the poor people, all of the people of color in this country to be treated fairly. But whatever semblance of a democracy we had, whatever semblance of normalcy we had, is really in our hands over these next coming days, weeks, and months. So make sure you check out Hold the Line Guide at the Red Line Guide on Twitter and Instagram. And more information will be in the description links below or the show notes if you are listening to the podcast version. If you have guest ideas for activists or just political voices you think would be great to have a voice, reach out to me. I'm Dan from the Web on Twitter and Dan from the Internet on Instagram. The show itself also has social media links. Those will be in the description or show notes. And until next time, it's going to be a bumpy one, so hang in there, friends.